Now, if I was to ask you, how are you feeling today? How would you answer? Well, if you go on Facebook or if you write an email, you can show how you are feeling, can't you? By adding a wee yellow face, an emoji, and you can show that you are happy or sad or excited and so on. But folks, here's what can happen. When my feelings dominate my life, when my feelings take control of me, they become a monster. Now here's what the Bible says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. It says, "For we live by faith, not by sight." But what happens so often? We live by feelings, not by faith, don't we? I woke up this morning and I don't feel good, so things can't be good. Or my friend bought the latest phone, I don't feel good, so I went and bought the same phone and now I feel a bit better. And when we live by our feelings, what happens? Our mood, it fluctuates so quickly, doesn't it? It changes. Maybe there's someone at work and one day they're saying, "Oh, hi, it's great to see you. You go, girl." But the next day, what are they like? Morning. Up and down. They're living by their feelings. And when that happens, my feelings become the centre of the universe. It's all about me and how I feel. Well, in Psalm chapter 23, we come to one of the best loved Psalms. It was written by David, and here we find a brilliant example of what it means to live by faith and not by feelings. So how does it start? Have a look at verse 1. "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." And that's one of the wonderful names of God in the Bible. The Lord my shepherd, or in Hebrew, Yahweh Raah. But notice in verse 1, God isn't just a shepherd or even the shepherd, he is my shepherd. This is personal, folks. And so what does it mean to live by faith and not by feelings? Well, very briefly, there are 4 things to know from Psalm 23 about the Lord my shepherd. And here's the first one. God's provision shows care. God's provision shows care. Look at verses 1 to 3. You know, when things go our way, life seems good, doesn't it? Our job is satisfying, our finances are in order, our relationships are enjoyable, our kids are behaving or sleeping, and our immediate future looks bright. So how are you doing? Oh, I feel fabulous, thank you. Couldn't be better. All is well with me. But what happens when life can be tough? God, do you care about me? Because I don't feel loved. You wouldn't believe the year that I've had in these past 12 months. Well, take a look at verse 1. Here's how God shows he cares. "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." Now, there are things that I would like to have. Like, I'd like a swimming pool in the back garden. And why? So I can go for a swim and then work on my tan during the summer here in Scotland. But you know what? God isn't promising to give me a swimming pool or a hot summer, by the way. What is God telling us? He'll provide for our needs. Look at verse 2. "He makes me lie down in green pastures to satisfy my hunger, and he leads me beside quiet waters to quench my thirst." And then in verse 3, we are reminded of our biggest need. What does it say? "He refreshes my soul." Our greatest need is spiritual, isn't it? It is to be rescued from our sin. And isn't it great that Jesus rescues all kinds of people? You know, sometimes I would go over to New York in America on business, and I love to visit the Brooklyn Tabernacle. It's a black Pentecostal church, and I'm the reserved Scottish guy sitting in the back seats. But at the Brooklyn Tabernacle, I heard a story, a true story, about a man called Ricardo, who was a male prostitute. And let me tell you about Ricardo. He would put on a dress, dye his hair blonde, and he took cocaine and heroin. And his life was just a complete mess. But one day, someone bothered to tell him about God's rescue plan. How out of his great love for us, God sent his son to take the punishment for all the wrong things that we've thought, said and done, so we could be reconciled with our Creator God. Now, Ricardo heard this, and here's what happened next. Ricardo received Jesus into his life, and he was wonderfully saved, and Ricardo's life was transformed. Isn't it great that Jesus rescues all kinds of people. And the point is this: God's provision for our needs shows he cares. And look at verse 3. Notice those little words, for his name's sake. So what does that mean? It means this: God will always act according to his character, his name, and he promises to provide for our needs. Okay, so what does it mean to live by faith in my shepherd? It's knowing that God's provision shows care. And secondly, it's knowing that God's protection justifies confidence. Have a look at verse 4. Now, how many of us know this? That being a Christian, it doesn't mean all your troubles are removed, does it? And we see that in verse 4, don't we? Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Now, some of you may know the name Horatio Spafford. Let me remind you about Horatio Spafford. Horatio was born in 1828, and he became a prominent lawyer in Chicago. And then in 1873, the family wanted to go on holiday in England, but because of business, Horatio, he would be delayed. And so Horatio sent his family ahead, his wife, Anna, and their 4 children. But on November the 22nd, 1873, while crossing the Atlantic Ocean, their ship was struck by another boat. And tragically, 226 people lost their lives, including all 4 of Horatio's daughters. And as Horatio later sailed over the spot where his daughters died, he wrote his famous hymn, "It is well with my soul." And listen to these incredible words that he could write. He wrote this: "But Lord, 'tis for thee, for thy coming we wait. The sky, not the grave, is our goal. O trump of the angel, O voice of the Lord, blessed hope, blessed rest of my soul. It is well with my soul." So let me ask you a question. Did Horatio understand why the ship sank? No. Did he have all the answers? No, he didn't. But he had confidence in this, that this life, it is not all there is. And God, as his shepherd, cared for him and his family, shown supremely at the cross 2,000 years ago. And whatever happens in this fallen, broken world, a Christian is ultimately safe in the hands of Jesus. Friends, why can we have such confidence? Because Jesus is on the throne and he does not change his seat. You may be going through a scary situation right now. You might be. Well, listen, here's the assurance from God. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. And notice in verse 4, that's what we find. For you, God, are with me. Lord, no matter what I'm going through, my confidence is in my shepherd. And now thirdly, what does it mean to live by faith and not our feelings? It means knowing this, that God's presence brings comfort. God's presence brings comfort. In verse 4. Now, sometimes we are aware of someone's presence in a room, aren't we? For example, in our home, I tend to like noise first thing in the morning, whereas Alison prefers quietness. And so if we're both in the kitchen first thing in the morning, Alison can be very aware of my presence, because at times I can speak loudly, especially first thing in the morning. And let me share this with you. The words, "Your voice goes through me, Richard," have actually been heard in the Gibb household some mornings. But there are other times, aren't there, when maybe you don't feel someone's presence, but you still know that they're there. For example, we once went to Windsor Castle in England, and apparently the Queen was there as well. And how did we know that? Well, if the Royal Standard flag is flown, it means that the Queen is in residence. Now, just imagine this. Imagine if the Queen had popped her head out of a window and she shouted, "Hey, Richard!" I would have felt her presence and waved back. But I didn't see her. I didn't feel her presence, but I knew she was still there. And so think about this. Sometimes we can feel God's presence with us, can't we? Other times we don't feel his presence, right? So how do we know that God is still with us even when we can't feel his presence? The answer is by faith. For we live by faith, not by sight. Our feelings. And in the Old Testament, that is why someone like Jacob, when he was blessing Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, remember, he could say this: "May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, may he bless these boys." Okay, so let's make this practical. How do we grow in our faith? By spending time reading the Bible, don't we? And allowing God to speak to us through it. And maybe using the excellent Bible study aids from Scripture Union to help us read the Bible. So what does it mean to live by faith and not feelings? It means knowing that God as our shepherd, his provision shows care, and God's protection justifies confidence, and God's presence brings comfort. And now finally, God's promise lasts continually. God's promise lasts continually. Verses 5 and 6. Take a look at verse 5 and look what it says. It says this: "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Now, the scene changes, doesn't it? The scene changes. I am now a guest at a banquet, looking forward to dwelling in God's house, looking back over 80 years and looking forward to 80 billion years and beyond in eternity. I had to take a funeral service once in Edinburgh. It was a good friend from Edinburgh called Sid Harrison, and the family asked that we sing the song Amazing Grace. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we've first begun. And I remember looking at Jill, that was Sid's wife, as we sang those words, and her face was full of joy. It was full of joy. Why? Because she trusted what Jesus said, recorded in John chapter 14. "My Father's house has many rooms, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am." And by faith, because of a historical event that took place 2,000 years ago on a cross, and because of an empty tomb, believers can look forward to that day when they will be together with Christ in glory. I wonder, are you looking forward to that day? I heard a story about a child who came home from Sunday school, and her mother asked her what she had learned at Sunday school. She said she had learned about a story of a man called Enoch. It's found in Genesis chapter 5, and it says this: "He walked faithfully with God, then he was no more, because God took him away." And so the girl said this: "I learned about a man named Enoch. He and God were good friends, and they used to go on long walks together. One day they walked so far that God said, 'We are nearer to my place than yours, Enoch. Why don't you come and stay with me?'" And you know what? When a believer dies in the Lord, that is just what happens. It's as though God says, "We are nearer to my place than yours. Why don't you come and stay with me?" And so as we close, what does it mean to live by faith and not by feelings? It means knowing this, that as my shepherd, God's provision shows care. And God's protection justifies confidence. And God's presence brings comfort. And God's promise lasts continually. I wonder if we can all echo the words in Galatians chapter 2, those magnificent words where it says, "I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me."